just given how well they've done in the past and how big they've become, I think that's their big area of revenue, right, would be the subscriptions. And so if they have a big gain in subscriptions, investors are pleased. It gives them the money to go create new content, hire new people, et cetera, et cetera. That's probably more in their wheelhouse than selling ads, which they haven't been doing for very long. And it doesn't seem like they're very successful at it. Maybe they're going to keep going. But it seems like Netflix's bread and butter has been subscribers for a long time, and they're continuing to do that well.
Now, how long are those new subscribers going to stick around if that Hollywood strike keeps going and there's no new content in the second half of this year?
It's a good question because it can be answered two ways. No new content is bad for Hollywood, period, end of sentence. Right. Well, the but in that sentence is Netflix, because it has so much content. And if everything shuts down, and this would be a rough go given how successful all of a sudden theaters and the movies have become, if everything shuts down, people will actually turn to Netflix.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Friday, July 28th installment of the Silicon Insider, the only uncensored look at life and business in the Valley. My name with the gravelly voice is Mike Malone, and I'm here with special contributor Scott Budman of NBC Bay Area. Our producer is Jordan Henderson. Our East Coast correspondent is Bob Grove, and our host is the Silicon Valley Business Journal. Okay, so watching NBC Bay Area the other night, looks like Elon did it. I saw them taking the bluebird off the sign outside the headquarters in San Francisco and some of the letters. Does that signify it's now called X.com?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that signifies that it's X. I think Musk can pretty much do with the company what he wants. He's going to call it X. I doubt very many other people will, to be honest. There are several reasons we can go into if you'd like about that. But as far as the outside side, it still has at least the ER part of Twitter as we speak. And it's not a complete job, which you can say about the whole transition so far, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of an allegory. Why would he abandon Twitter? I mean, the name Twitter, it's become so embedded into modern cultural life. Why can't he just keep Twitter as a function of his new mega platform, whatever it includes? Why can't you keep Twitter as a component of that?
It's a great question. If we know anything, after covering Silicon Valley for decades between us, we know there is power in a good brand, whether that's Apple or Google. Twitter is a really, really popular brand. Anywhere in the world you go, people know that bird, and they know Twitter, and they know what it stands for. Far beyond the size of the company, I think, is the power of that brand. Why he would change that to a letter of the alphabet is baffling, especially since he's trying to grow the site and add advertising. I understand his fascination with X.com. Remember, it was X.com before it was PayPal. He's held on to it. He wants to make this mega app, but he's breaking down the most powerful part of it, which is the brand, and that I don't understand.
Yeah, you know, my early days as a reporter, I would occasionally you Xerox something, or he Xerox this, and I would get a cease and desist letter from the corporate attorneys at Xerox saying, "We are a distinct company. Please do not use that as a verb." They were trying to hang on to a word that was so part of our culture at the time that they had to defend it regularly. And now Elon's just looks like he's just giving it away. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a brand that's worth billions of dollars, everyone is saying, and here's a company struggling to keep billions of dollars. I don't know. I really, it's all very baffling because here's a guy who has built up brands. I mean, in the space world, SpaceX is a huge brand. In the EV world, or the automotive world in general, Tesla is a huge brand. And yet to break down such a 15-year powerhouse of a brand that everyone knows, and there's a verb to tweet. It's part of our lexicon. I just can't figure out how anyone would think this is a good move. And yet we seem to be progressing towards X. No one's going to say, I X'd this or whatever. And granted, you know, Facebook and Instagram, they're part of Meta, right? But nobody uses the term Meta. And to Mark Zuckerberg's credit and that company's credit, they kept Facebook and Instagram as Facebook and Instagram. Alphabet is a company. No one uses that term. They still use Google. Everybody understands this. So I don't see the term or the verb Twitter or tweet to go away as hard as Musk may try to do that.
And for 3 generations, X has been equated with seamy stuff.
Right.
Yeah, it just boggles the mind. Anyway, you talked about advertising at Twitter. Looks like Musk has lowered the rates, trying to get some of that lost advertising back.
Yeah.
I think he's desperate on that.
I mean, you know, that's traditionally what advertisers do, say, during a recession or tough times. As we know now from the Federal Reserve, we're not in a recession and everybody's spending money, except apparently advertisers on Twitter. And Musk is
also, well, we'll talk about Netflix in a few minutes too, because apparently they're doing the same thing, is cutting their rates.
Perhaps, but remember, Netflix became a gigantic company without advertising.
Yes.
They have subscriptions and they sell a ton of them. Twitter is trying to sell these $8 blue check marks, not very successfully. Musk is his own worst enemy to advertisers because we've talked about the content of Twitter going downhill. Advertisers don't want to be linked with that. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge for a really successful brand like Twitter to sell advertising. Imagine the challenge ahead for something that may be called X to sell advertising.
Yeah. Okay. One suggestion is that Twitter began to cut advertising prices in response to the potential threat from Threads. But as we know, after that incredible initial launch, with amazing subscription numbers, the place has fallen like, 80% in terms of usage or even 90%? I mean, there's even reports out of Meta that Zuckerberg barely uses it. I mean, this has got to be one of the biggest product user base crashes in history. I mean, just in a matter of 3 weeks, they've lost most of their business. How did that happen? What's wrong with Threads?
I don't think they lost 90% of their business. I think the growth slowed considerably. Yeah. That makes sense for something that got to 100 million that fast. Now the growth rate is much slower because people jumped on it and then realized, well, this is kind of another Twitter. So I think the growth slowdown makes sense. As far as a revenue advertising threat to Twitter, it's there, but it's going to take some time. Facebook and even Instagram took time to put advertising on the site. Threads, I don't think is going to have advertising anytime really soon. And so there is a window for competitors, whether it's TikTok or Twitter, to try to snag advertisers before Threads starts opening itself up to ads. But it's a crowded field right now, which is both good for consumers, but at the same time, you have to ask yourself, when I come up with a story or something clever to post, how many places do I really want to put it on? Do I want to put it on Threads? Do I want to put it on Twitter? Do I need to hit Instagram? Do I have to go to TikTok? Am I going to put it on Spill? What about Blue Sky? There are all of these places now that are vying for your eyeballs. And until that shakes out, it's interesting because TikTok was a winner in one way, Instagram kind of in another, and Twitter was a winner in one way. But now that's up for grabs. So it's confusing.
I also think they're running out of new niches, and they're saturating the ones they have. So they're being forced to try to find something new, and to do so, they're colliding with each other now, which is kind of the history of tech, right?
Right. I mean, I think ultimately the consumers will decide, and that's very good. But the consumers right now, I think, are deciding, and so some are going to shake out, and some are going to have really slow growth while the others sort of take off. And I think we're in that inflection point just starting now to see, of the 6 or 7 places where you can put the same exact post, which ones are people going to choose?
Well, you got to be really busy, because when you file a story, you put it on these other sites. I mean, you got some sites, you've reached millions of users on certain days.
Right.
How do you decide? I mean, you just sit there for an hour and start loading it into, Twitter and TikTok and Facebook and all that? Or what are you going to do?
So yeah, I'm one of those people, one of those consumers that is in the in the process of culling the herd right now. I did for a couple of crazy, confusing, eyeball tearing up weeks, put everything everywhere. But you start to see, Twitter for me is the main thrust of where I get the audience. And so I'm going to stay there. I'm trying to be on Threads. Threads is growing. That's interesting. It's growing for me by, say, hundreds of followers, maybe dozens of followers. Blue Sky, 1 or 2 a day. Spill is still slow. So I think eventually I'll be like a lot of people that are saying, okay, I'm still getting the pin action over here and not so much with these 3 or 4. So I'm just going to leave these because I want to be over here. Now, if I were a social media manager, maybe the pressure would be on to hit 3 or 4 of those each time. And that's going to get confusing and kind of tiring, I think, for people.
Okay, well, as long as we're on Zuckerberg and Meta, he had a really good quarterly announcement. I mean, they're back on top. They're flying. I mean, the market has been setting record numbers the last week or two, but Meta's doing really well, which is interesting because they came out with their numbers and everyone went, yay. But then there was a little addendum to that saying, and we intend to spend a whole lot more on the metaverse in 2024. Now, they've burned, $20 billion so far in the metaverse with not a whole lot to show for it. And the market was like, oh, okay, still bumped it up 7% on the announcement, the stock value. It's like, what are they doing? I mean, is this truly, is Zuckerberg really thinks he's onto something and they're starting to see progress in the labs? Or is this his white whale? And he's publicly committed to it, so his ego won't allow him to walk away.
I mean, there may be something in there. He does seem committed to it. And you're right. In the earning report, they said, we're still going to pursue this and we're still losing a ton of money. But investors, and remember, when they
on surge on the metaverse next year.
Yeah, and this is something that cost them a tremendous amount of market value. Their stock was at like $90 a share at the end of last year. Here we are 7-8 months later, and it has surged. It has tripled. It's just crazy what this year of efficiency has done for investor enthusiasm for Meta, to the point where you're right. When Zuckerberg says we're still going to throw money into this big pit of the metaverse, investors did shrug their shoulders this time. And I think it's because he has proven that if push comes to shove, he can cut costs and focus on where the profits are. And that was really something important to prove to investors. But yeah, I think it's a legitimate question to say, how far is he going to go with this metaverse that really has not made a dent, not only in users, but in profits, which it's far, far from.
Now, meanwhile, speaking of advertising revenues, Google had a really good quarter too, thanks to their advertising revenues. And it's kind of interesting. They're shuffling around senior management over there in the big tent in Mountain View. I mean, they've taken their CFO Porat and making him president and chief investment officer.
That is a her, by the way, Ruth Porat.
Her, okay. Sorry, I've never covered her story. So what's with that move? I mean, to be a president of the company, well, she's not CEO, so she's not, strictly speaking, a day-to-day line person. But chief investment officer, is Google contemplating another round of mergers and acquisitions?
I think they have been doing that. I mean, Google needs to grow. It needs to grow just in the AI space. It has its own venture capital arm that's been quite successful. It also has that sort of skunk work operation that's given us some successes and some failures, but it's clearly not afraid to spend money when it comes to investment. And I think it's a move by a really, I mean, heck, for Silicon Valley terms, this is now a mature, company. And what they do, what mature companies do are, either just pay out investments and coast, or say, hey, we're going to continue to invest and grow, and not just pay out dividends, but we're going to continue to invest and grow. And And I think that's an important move that investors like because they're worried it's going to become one of those just sort of, sit and rest on its laurel stalks during a time when it's got this really, really big vein of profit to tap into, and that's artificial intelligence.
Well, as CFO, she obviously knows where the money is and how much they got to go out and spend on new investments. So we should see some, dynamic activity coming out of there pretty soon. Okay, Netflix, they're cutting ad prices. As you mentioned, they just got in the advertising business. It sounds like it's sort of like a barometer. The ones that are getting a lot of advertisers are doing really well, and the ones that apparently are not getting the level of advertising they want are trying to bargain basement their way into the game again. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I mean, Netflix is kind of a special category because it's sort of trying to get it both ways, right? You have subscriptions, and then you're trying to sell some ads. I think what came out of Netflix's earning report was a pretty impressive gain in subscribers. And I think just given how well they've done in the past and how big they've become, I think that's their big area of revenue, right, would be the subscriptions. And so if they have a big gain in subscriptions, investors are pleased. It gives them the money to go create new content, hire new people, et cetera, et cetera. That's probably more in their wheelhouse than selling ads, which they haven't been doing for very long. And it doesn't seem like they're very successful at it. Maybe they're going to keep going. But it seems like Netflix's bread and butter has been subscribers for a long time, and they're continuing to do that well.
Now, how long are those new subscribers going to stick around if that Hollywood strike keeps going and there's no new content in the second half of this year?
It's a good question because it can be answered two ways. No new content is bad for Hollywood, period, end of sentence. Right. Well, the but in that sentence is Netflix because it has so much content. And if everything shuts down, and this would be a rough go given how successful all of a sudden theaters and the movies have become, if everything shuts down, people will actually turn to Netflix. Remember, Netflix really grew during the pandemic because people...
Weren't we supposed to just stop watching cable and go out into the natural world and the sunshine once the lockdown ended?
Yes, and we did. And boy, I mean, look at the box office weekend that has just hit. Could you imagine the bad timing of this strike if that stuff comes to a halt now that people are back in love with the theater experience and doing it as a community and having popcorn, et cetera? But the big winner in that, I think, would be Netflix.
Okay. Well, let's see what happens. Meanwhile, Microsoft's revenues, the unexpected high flyer the last few years have been Microsoft. They were an aging company. They were getting sclerotic, and now, boom, they're taking off. Well, they finally kind of hit the ceiling, and they're flattened out. And it would have been worse, but they're doing really well in AI. That seemed to have lifted all the boats in that company's revenue projections.
Yeah, that's the hot area right now, and that's why I think Microsoft is going to be okay. But yeah, they've really stuck to a small number of things since Satya Nadella took over, and they've really succeeded in all of them. And if they're seeing a dip in one area, they're seeing strength in another. Microsoft is just sort of seeing this second life as a gargantuan success, and it's really impressive, given, like you say, how they were sort of put out to pasture as an old school company.
Like we said last time, you get a great CEO, they can revitalize an old company.
Right. And that's clearly what Nadella has done. And I think that the idea that Microsoft is saying, hey, look at this AI success is going to kickstart everybody else, because right now, most of these AI companies are in startup mode. They're getting funded, but they're not seeing profits yet. And I think the two companies that have really proven that money can be made in this is Microsoft and NVIDIA.
Yeah, and maybe Google soon with their new investment officer. Maybe that's what that's all about, is get into AI with both feet. Yeah, okay. Interesting piece of news came across. I didn't realize this was happening, but more than 200 school districts across the country, kind of being propelled on by plaintiffs' lawyers, they're filing lawsuits against social media companies, including Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, and YouTube, for essentially turning students into making them discipline problems and creating mental health problems. They're going to try to do a massive class action suit. basically America's public schools versus America's social networks. I mean, you kind of shake your head and go, how's that going to happen? But we've seen these major class action suits over the last 20 years get very successful. If they're accurate, they bring out a lot of horrifying facts. If they're not accurate, it's a pretty good shakedown model. Are you hearing anything about this? I mean, I haven't seen it covered a lot in the news, but apparently it's building steam.
Yeah, I mean, I've covered this a couple of times, and the schools have a point, but they're going up against largely Section 230, right? And so are these social media sites responsible for the posts and even the conduct of those who are on the sites? We're talking about that in January 6th and all that sort of thing as well. I just don't know what the answer will be. And I don't think even the school districts know, but they're frustrated. They're putting up their hands. I mean, you get these crazy TikTok challenges that are even damaging to schools and property. And who else would you blame if not the individuals or even the social media sites that are passing this around? Again, it has come up a lot in the January 6th hearings. So I really don't know what comes of this. There's also a lot of talk at changing, if not getting rid of Section 230, to make these sites at least somewhat responsible for the actions of their users.
Well, I'll make a prediction. I think you can go around Section 230 and not argue about the danger of the content because you can't win on that. But all of these sites have used casino and addiction techniques to get young people essentially addicted to the experience. And if you can show that was done premeditated to get control of kids' brains, you would have a hell of a case there.
Possibly. I mean, look at the example of January 6th. So all these individuals who participated in those riots and on the Capitol, they were arrested as individuals, and they're saying, I was just following, a TikTok prompt or something, or what I saw on Facebook. And the authorities have said, we don't care. As an individual, you did this, and we're going to arrest you for it. So if you can somehow catch up to, people who are, say, ripping off a car or damaging a school because of a TikTok challenge, and they say, but it's something that I was challenged on TikTok, and they would say, again, that doesn't matter. You as an individual did this, and so we're going to discipline you for that. That might act as a deterrent without having to get into Section 230. But again, I don't know where these things are legally or anything like that. I do know that the schools are very frustrated because they feel they're losing, discipline and things like that because of these sites.
Okay, well, finally, as long as we're on robbing kids' brains, TikTok announced it is launching an e-commerce business in the U.S. to sell Chinese-made goods to kids. So now that TikTok has our nation's kids' souls, now they're going to go after their wallets. So, I mean, wouldn't you think TikTok might kind of pull back a little on doing this stuff? Unless they're getting orders from Beijing. I mean, I don't know why they would do this right now when they're the bad guys in this story in the minds of our legislators and most of the American population.
Yeah, there's something to be said for hubris in the tech industry, and I know you've seen this a million times in the career of a journalist here. But I mean, TikTok. Now you're going to talk about commerce. I would say the same thing to Elon Musk. Now you're going to talk about turning Twitter into a bank. Are you kidding me? These are times when trust is at its all-time low, and now they're saying, well, we're going to have a place to store your money. This is crazy talk, and I don't see it working all that well. I mean, there are payment sites from PayPal to Zelle to Venmo that work because they've earned trust. But when these sites are at their, if not all-time low, when they're at a low point when it comes to trust, now's not the time to talk about getting our money. I'm sorry, it's just not.
Yeah, they don't have enough goodwill to be able to take advantage of that goodwill to get consumers to follow them.
Right.
And it's a strange time, isn't it? I mean, it's like these companies were just batting down their hatches during the lockdown, and now they're cut loose, and we're just seeing just how crazy they actually are. It's going to be a very interesting rest of this year, I think.
Right. I think if you study, and I have not, but if you study users of WeChat in China, which is, this so-called mega app that Elon Musk is talking about. I'm guessing there's a whole lot of trust in each individual thing, the social aspect, the retail aspect, the finance aspect, but you need all of that to come together. And these sites just don't have that right now. If you're called up to Capitol Hill, or if you're, being criticized for giving a platform to Nazis, now's not the time to say, hey, let's talk commerce, because people aren't
money now. Will they trust us with your pension money? Yeah, that's a great business.
Exactly.
Okay, before we go, I want to send out best wishes to some of our oldest and most loyal listeners. To Valley Pioneers, Steve and Linda Millard. Steve, it's great to see you're doing better. In Paris, Renaud Roquebert on the pending nuptials of his oldest daughter. And to Edith Varick in Bandon, we will see you soon. And that's it for now, folks. You can find us on the Silicon Valley Business Journal homepage, as well as on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.